It is Friday, September 30th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's been somewhat of a quiet week this time around, if you can believe it. So nothing too crazy, but there's always something worth discussing. So let's get into it. First up, as always, our PS Plus reminder. This is your last call for the September PS Plus Essential Games. Grab them before they go away. October 3rd, it's going to change over to Hot Wheels Unleashed on PS4 and PS5, Injustice 2 on PS4, and Super Hot on PS4. A solid month, nothing crazy, but it is something where I will recommend highly to play Super Hot. Although, to be fair, I've never actually played the 2D version, so to be completely honest, I've always played the VR version of that game because it's the most quintessential, fantastic VR experience. If I'm ever introducing somebody to VR, I always make sure to show them Super Hot VR. So the 2D one I am interested to try out, and also Hot Wheels Unleashed. Do not let the IP fool you. That game is surprisingly fun and also somewhat challenging, given that you kind of expect that it might be somewhat easy to get into, but that's not really the case for that game, but certainly a lot of fun. So not a crazy month for PS Plus, but still better on average versus what we were getting before the relaunch. And also this time around, it seems like we don't have the extra or premium lineup just yet, so perhaps last month was a fluke. Sony said on the PS blog they'll announce that lineup later this month, which I think that's a mistake because this month is over. So unless they plan on revealing it today, I think they meant within a week or so going into October. Moving on to our first news story, let's talk about the PlayStation Stars Rewards program, which has already launched in Southeast Asia and Japan, and launching very soon in North and South America on October 5th, or if you're in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, that will be October 13th. So not a massive time difference between this entire service rolling out, but because it is already available in Southeast Asia, we do have the first details on what the service is actually like, so let's go over that. Now, again, as a reminder, PS Stars is free to join, no PS Plus required. You can access it right from the PlayStation app on iOS and Android. There's a little PS Stars icon in the top right you can see. And Sony does mention they do plan to expand to console in the future, so for right now it's reserved purely for the smartphone, but there's two types of rewards, loyalty points and digital collectibles. The loyalty points can be used to redeem PSN wallet funds, exclusive digital collectibles, and select PS Store products. You can check out your points balance on the PlayStation app under your player profile, and the PlayStation Stars points, your point balance history, which for this account there's none, but there's 4 status levels that you can be at based on the number of non-common trophies you earn, and also any full game purchases made from the PlayStation Store. So there's 2 ways to earn points, but doing both of those will move you up the status tiers there. And with the higher tiers, you can get exclusive collectibles, and also if you're at the highest one, you can get priority access when contacting PlayStation customer support. Status levels are held for the remainder of a calendar year and then 13 months after that. So if you say reach level 2 in May, you should stay at level 2 until the end of that year, and then an additional 13 months. And I assume they're clarifying this in the case that you reach level 2 and you don't do something to continue climbing the tier status, or just not being engaged in the service anymore. So assuming you're buying and playing games at a somewhat regular rate, you should be able to keep your tiers, indefinitely, more or less. That's at least how I interpret it. And then also points will expire after 24 months from when you first got them. So basically if you're not really doing much of anything, or you use your PlayStation very infrequently, just be mindful of a 2-year limit on the points you earn and trying to use them up before they go away. But it's pretty straightforward on the PS app. There's not much there. You can sign up for a campaign and launch games, start earning trophies across all of PSN more or less, and start leveling up. So it's a nice free service. That was it's better to have there than nothing at all. So I'm glad that Sony's finally doing something like this. In fact, looking at the digital collectibles, I'm not gonna lie, I looked at them and I'm like, oh, these are so cool, but I can't get roped into something like that again, right? So We'll see how often they, roll out campaigns and how cool some of the collectibles are, and when they bake it onto the console directly, that might be really cool to have kind of a display cabinet on your profile. But otherwise, that's, nice to have versus nothing at all. I will say it would be great if we had some kind of way to authenticate physical purchases, because I likely just will not be able to use this service all that much when I'm not, getting credit for full game purchases on PSN, which I almost always avoid doing. So a simple little piece of paper with a code slipped into physical PS5 games would be great to enter in, and then you get credit for your purchase at retail, which is still a PlayStation product. Also seeing a lot of complaints about the customer service preferential treatment when you're at the max level for PS stars. A lot of players in Southeast Asia and Japan, I guess, are unhappy with this. I'm kind of indifferent. It's something where a lot of businesses do this, right? They offer some kind of preferential treatment or expedited service when you put in a lot of money or you're of a higher status, whether it's a credit card, an airline, or cell service. It's, all businesses do that. So if you've never liked it, then you're not going to like it here, but otherwise not necessarily a deal breaker per se. The big problem with PlayStation's customer service is their customer service in general. So whether you're jumped in front of the chat line or not, it's kind of bogus, but I would want just the support overall to be improved if we're going to really, point out some problem areas. Next up, we have some more movement for the expected PC releases of PlayStation Studio games, and Sony finally confirmed a new one, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, coming to PC next month, October 27th. Which, if you remember for this game, it was leaked initially a while ago, not only in the GeForce Now list of games, where so much of that has come true, but we also saw this game leak next to Returnal with a bunch of screenshots for their PC settings menu, so we knew this game was coming at some point, and yesterday was the time that Sony did it, where they finally revealed it on the PS blog and also a new trailer, and it showcases the standard PC stuff. You've got ultra-wide 21:9 support, NVIDIA DLSS support, also variable refresh rate, and this is the kind of game where you can walk into it and not have to really push it to the absolute top end, right? It's a very colorful, beautiful game just on its own, so any sort of modest setup is going to be just fine for this game. I would argue it's more suited for the Steam Deck for what is kind of an unassumingly very good 3D world sort of, I don't want to say rip-off, right, but that's essentially kind of what it is, or at least that's what I initially thought, right, when the game was revealed during that PlayStation showcase, and it's like, look, I like Sackboy, I like Little Big Planet a lot, but I looked at that and I was like, is this IP really strong enough to be, to be on its own doing a 3D world genre-style game? But it is genuinely, very good. So whether you're on PS4, 5, PC, Steam Deck, totally worth playing. Now, this next news story kind of goes hand in hand with the one we just talked about. Returnal and Sackboy keep leaking. Sackboy confirmed, Returnal not yet, but Returnal had more evidence of its PC version come out, where somebody on YouTube uploaded a 30-40 second clip of Returnal's PC graphic settings. So they were just adjusting things like shadow quality, ray traced reflections, screen optimizations, VSync, just 40 seconds of toggling settings, and that was it. But that was pretty legitimate. More so when you go back to that video and it's taken down, so the claim was from SIE themselves. So yeah, this game is inevitable at some point. We just don't know when. Maybe by the end of this year. Could be more of a Q1, Q2 kind of game. They're not going to just release all this stuff as quickly as they can, but certainly it seems like that's been the case. Either way, I will say, Returnal, that's going to be a big one. Please play that game. It's so good, I'm telling you. So if you don't have a PS5, if you're still on PC, if you got a Steam Deck, I think this game would be so cool on Steam Deck to play it locally. That way it's not, remote play or anything, because that's not really ideal. That would be such a cool way to play Returnal. So it's more a matter of when, not if. And also Sony did release a new trailer for Spider-Man Miles Morales, the PC version, which this was nothing, no major update here, so no release date. And they still have a timeline of fall 2022. So that game is expected to release by the end of this year, but otherwise this was more or less just a short teaser, not even really outlining the enhancements or anything, but you can expect it to pretty much be largely the same to Spider-Man Remastered, but that will that's still expected to launch by fall of this year, so it should be at any moment they're going to announce a release date. Moving on to our next story, it was recently discovered on LinkedIn that the developer Jetpack Interactive is working on a AAA live services game for Sony. The post reads, and I quote here, "We are hiring programmers to join our small and nimble team at Jetpack. We're excited to embark on a new live services title with Sony, and we're ready to launch." Now, before we get ahead of ourselves on this one, Jetpack Interactive is indeed a smaller team. They're largely a support studio that takes on contract work, so they've done engineering for Dark Souls and Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2. They ported Orcs Must Die to PS4, and most recently they did the God of War 2018 PC port. And they're also helping with Ragnarok as well, so based on their current job listings, we can see they are hiring for this new Sony partnership, and they are explicitly saying you'll be working with Unreal Engine. So based on that alone, we can rule out certain first-party teams where even if they, even if we know they have multiplayer projects or there's rumored live service games at those studios, we can rule out certain teams based on what engine they use. So when I first, saw this, I thought, okay, we're looking at the two games that popped up to me at least was Helldivers 2 and Twisted Metal, which Helldivers 2 leaked recently. That game is all but confirmed. We know it's coming. It's more a matter of when. And it's something where that game is doing, in terms of scope, it's a lot bigger than the first game. So I'm sure some might not consider Helldivers to be a major AAA PlayStation or Sony game, but, they are increasing the scope of that game a lot this time around for the sequel. So, or they still might just be overselling it because they're trying to generate interest and talent for the team, and that's fine too. But I thought about that game, and then also the rumored Twisted Metal project, which that one also not confirmed obviously, but we have a lot of evidence about that game's existence, how it was at Lucid Games, and then Sony was not happy with the progress. They moved it over to Firesprite, and at least right now we've seen the director move over. We've seen multiple sources talk about this project and how it's slated for sometime next year, around or near the TV show, which we know is coming, right? And that game is using, or it should be using, Unreal Engine. So I think this is something where there's no reveal here, right? There's no new game per se, but I think they are certainly supporting an existing project in the behind the scenes, more or less. And we know Sony's working on a ton of live service games anyway. It's just that for this, they might be really ramping up one of these projects. Anyway, moving on to our next story, another PlayStation Productions project, not Twisted Metal, but the Last of Us HBO TV series. We finally got a full trailer for The Last of Us Day, which was formerly known as Outbreak Day. But yeah, we finally got a full trailer, and that was encouraging to see for sure. Not going to say it was like mind-blowing, but something where, if you remember when we got that first 10-15 second sort of fast jump cut first look at it in that HBO sizzle reel, where that was encouraging to see. Same deal here. I mean, in the context of a trailer, it's meant to be a first impressions kind of thing, so you get a sense of the direction, the presentation, the tone being set, and I think the trailer largely accomplishes what it's meant to do, which is showcase a beat-for-beat adaptation of The Last of Us into a HBO series. So it looks very good to me. The tone in particular, I think, really sets it up for a very faithful recreation of the same story that we went through in the game. Of course, when you're going to be watching it as a static, experience, as a long-form TV show, it's going to play out much different, where you don't necessarily need all those combat moments. But that is also a part of it where I would like to see how that plays out, because we finally saw a clicker too. And that was just it was like trippy looking to see that. But so far, very optimistic, feeling good about it. More so than the Uncharted movie, which I still stand by was like a good movie, just not mind-blowing, right? This, I think, has a lot more potential, and you can see how HBO is really backing the show in a big way. And also, I mean, it's been viewed, like, this trailer alone, like 20-something million times across various social media sites and re-uploads. So they're putting a ton of money into this, and there's also a ton of interest in it as well. So I think there's a lot of folks riding on this show's success, and I can't wait to see how it lands. Next up, we finally have a meaningful, real, official update in the long-running Silent Hill game rumors that Sony may or may not be involved in. What we have here is Silent Hill, the short message, rated in Korea, and it very much is rated as a video game. The publisher listed is the same publisher that Konami often uses in Korea for their games, and so this is something where games do not get rated unless they are real. So there you go. It's refreshing to finally have some, serious movement here outside of what has certainly been a lot of rumors. Granted, it's always been separate sources that don't have direct knowledge with one another and whatnot, and that's why we've always been following this when there was the suggestion that Sony may be involved in these projects in some way, whether locking down timed exclusivity or it could be simple marketing rights. But just based on that alone, we've seen Sony doing a lot of timed agreements, and also they love doing marketing rights as well. And even in that case where it is a marketing rights decision, that means despite it being a multi-platform game, which in this case, just based on speculation alone, it seems like this might be actually the short playable teaser or some kind of PT-style teaser. That's what's being inferred here, is that it would be for the next mainline entry in the series, and that's the game in question where Sony would have marketing rights for that game despite it being, say, multi-platform. And in those cases, Sony would still have the rights to announce that game on their terms. So when we have this, combine that with Helldivers 2, also Final Fantasy 16's next trailer sometime next month. I mean, we've now got fuel to the fire here of Sony having something to showcase or talk about before the year closes out, right? So whether it is a somewhat beefy state of play or a proper PlayStation showcase, it was always more a matter of, what will they bring, what will they show, because there is still a lot of first-party devs where, as I've said, they are not ready to showcase or talk about what they're working on. So now we finally have more mounting evidence of Sony indeed having something to show before the year closes out. And Silent Hill would be a refreshing project to finally put out there, right? Especially after following rumors for so long. So hopefully the wait is not going to be much longer. Moving on to our next story, if you remember the updated PS5 1200 series model that we were talking about when Austin Evans did a new teardown, and he did not go as far as to look at the actual SoC, so we weren't sure quite yet if it was indeed moved over to a smaller process size, but Angstronomics.com confirmed with a teardown and pictures showing that the new PS5 1200 series models have indeed moved over to the updated 6nm process. So that would explain the reduced power consumption shown in Austin Evans' recent teardown, which also means Sony could now comfortably reduce the cooling assembly since there isn't as much heat being generated as before. And this also means Sony is now seeing a reduction in cost per wafer, as they're effectively seeing a 20-something% increase in chips on each wafer. So assuming yield is still in a comparable range, they'll be securing more PS5s for production. Or at least we can assume they've nailed down what has been such a big holdup. There's always the possibility that something in the supply chain, no matter what the part is, just one part alone can bottleneck production. But we are seeing that, that's good news for the 1200 series model. And so across the board, it's something where, as a consumer, it's going to draw less power. That's always good, right? Not a major thing, but certainly it's going to be a bit more efficient. And could it indeed possibly be a bit quieter, although PS5 on its own is extremely quiet. There is still the lottery of what fan you get in your PS5 that might determine if it's a little bit louder, but across the board, PS5's been very quiet, so it's good for the consumer. Obviously, it's good for Sony, where this is a cost down measure too, so it does make PS5 cheaper to manufacture, but as we also speculated in that initial teardown video from Austin, it's something where it doesn't look good on the back of Sony increasing PS5's price in most markets, but we technically do not know the final cost out the door once the thing is actually made, completely assembled, and then also fulfilled to various retailers, and then at that point officially sold to the consumer. So some parts they can cost down, but other parts maybe they haven't been able to cost down. So in theory, it might be something where they're really trying to keep up with just the value of these currencies and all these markets. But either way, Sony is a business, so I'm sure there's certainly a very good upside here for their bottom line, accounting for that price increase, which I would still love for them to eat the cost. But either way, all around, it's still good news for overall PS5 availability, because last week we also had that story about a new possible PS5 Slim model with a detachable disk drive. It would line up around when Sony, redesigns their console, and that would be an actual chassis redesign. Like the actual console design would look different. They normally slim down the box. PS5 can stand to lose some weight, and also just the physical appearance can be shrunken a bit. So all things considered, that makes sense. And if we do look at Tom Henderson's initial report about that detachable disk drive PS5, he'd mentioned how Sony plans on allegedly selling nearly 30 million consoles in fiscal year 2023, 12 million being the current chassis design and 18 million of the new one, which just, regardless of redesign, that number in totality is now really put into perspective based on the fact that Sony has indeed moved over to a new smaller process size. So availability for PS5, I think, is going to look a lot better come like mid 2023 or around when that new console finally does get revealed and released, which also at this point, if you're in the market for a PS5, as long as you're comfortable with waiting a few weeks or a month, 2 months, just to make sure that every console being sold is a CFI 1200 series, then you should be lined up to comfortably have what is the most power efficient PS5 thus far, because by the time that redesigned console comes out, unless you really care about having the new redesigned smaller PS5, I doubt there's going to be any other major advancements in this area within the next year, basically, because that console is rumored to come out September 2023. So by and large, most consumers are set up for buying the most power efficient PS5 very soon. But I would caution still, there is more testing to be done on these new machines to make sure there's no dramatic difference, or perhaps they're not, getting overly hot in certain areas. There's no guarantee, of course, but just at a surface level, they're on a smaller process size, and that is why it's generating less heat so far, but also generating less power, which usually is a good thing. Now, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about what was a pretty big story from yesterday, which was the confirmation that Stadia is closing down officially. So it's done, kaputs. January 18th, Stadia is shutting down, confirmed by Google over on their official blog from the Vice President and General Manager Phil Harrison, well known from PlayStation fans as the man that for the PS3 times he was a champion of PlayStation Home back in the days. If not for him, PlayStation Home would not have happened, or at least that's the account made from many working on PS Home at the time. But anyway, Stadia is closing down, and at least on that official blog, Google confirmed that they are going to refund all hardware, controllers, games, DLC. They're just not refunding Stadia Pro subscriptions, but otherwise, any dedicated fans that were, buying and playing with Stadia, they're getting their money back, which is honestly a pretty commendable thing for Google to do. If you're gonna kind of sweep this failed initiative under the rug, then that was certainly the way to do it. But in this blog post, we do have a very interesting note here where it says, and I quote, "The underlying technology platform that powers Stadia has been proven at scale and transcends gaming. We see clear opportunities to apply this technology across other parts of Google like YouTube, Google Play, and our augmented reality efforts, as well as make it available to our industry partners, which aligns with where we see the future of gaming headed." So, of course, Google's not going to just throw away years of R&D and commercially viable technology because they're done with it. But essentially, Google's still a massive company, and they have built a very solid foundation where they can act like a third party and just court separate clients, more established clients in the space. And in the context of Sony, I would certainly speculate that they would be a party that would be very interested in possibly utilizing Stadia tech, at least in a way to really advance Sony's own cloud gaming efforts, which, at least for Sony, we can say that they initially announced a partnership with Microsoft back in, May 2019, around there. And that initially was, seen as puzzling that Sony would partner with Microsoft to utilize Azure tech. And since then, nothing has actually happened. Just FYI, as a little update to that initial announcement, Sony has not done anything with them as far as I'm aware. They still primarily use Amazon Web Services. And at least behind the scenes, of course, Sony themselves has their own, they're doing a lot of R&D to advance their own cloud gaming efforts. So it might be something where they they've had something in the pipeline for a while when it comes to really advancing their cloud services in a more meaningful way, because that's the one little weird thing with Sony right now, is that when it comes to cloud gaming, and I know people generally don't really care too much about it still, but when it comes to cloud gaming, Sony, like many initiatives, they've been there from the early onset, right? They love to be at the forefront of emerging technologies. They do this with a lot of things, and streaming was one of them, where they jumped in 2013 with acquiring Gaikai, and then a year later doing the PlayStation Now closed beta, and to this day we still have PlayStation Plus cloud streaming. But it's always been so borderline humiliating that when it comes to cloud streaming, they were there so early, and yet they're never a part of the conversation or taken seriously when it comes to cloud streaming. Microsoft and Amazon, and well, it was Google, but they were primarily the major players in the space, and Sony was just not even, they never really were considered even in that same ballpark, because, well, what they offer isn't necessarily all that good. But I would argue that most of those services still aren't really up to snuff just yet. Stadia did certainly have a lot of, a lot of customers really enjoyed the experience that Google had offered. They just dropped the ball on so many other aspects of their business. So not only was it highly speculative technology that a lot of consumers still aren't really ready to jump into just yet, but they made a lot of mistakes. So with Sony, they can certainly, they might have a lot to gain from this, if they are, say, looking at it, and maybe they can work something out with Google. That is pure speculation on my part, but certainly worth considering now that Google has essentially dropped out of this business, but vouched for offering that technology to any other parties that would be interested. And so I think over time we are going to see that happen, and who decides to partner with them, I think, is going to be worth watching. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And on Tuesday, our video was looking at PS5's backwards compatibility and the PS4 games that break it. So PS5 plays the vast majority of PS4 games, but there is a small selection of titles where when you play them on PS5, they don't actually work the way they're supposed to, or they break, or they crash. And go check out that very interesting little case study on the few games that are a problem on PS5. And then coming up, as always, another video on Tuesday. But until then, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.